come on. Move.
Now imagine there was an emergency outside the truck, an accident, something terrible on the ranch with a chainsaw. And I jump in this truck, but the truck, it won't shift into drive. Why? Because the cameras and sensors inside this cab won't let it shift. Because it detects my eyes are big, there's a lot of emotion, there's some panic, and it doesn't feel that I'm fit to drive. Now that's not science fiction, that is happening because Ford just filed the patents. Ford actually has a series of patents down at the US Patent and Trade Office that deal with the sensors and cameras inside the cab of their truck. And if the sensors in that truck determine that you're not fit to drive, that truck will not actually shift from park to drive. Now they already have a system called telematics, and that's where they can actually pull up cameras in real time inside the cab of their fleet vehicles. Now they actually market this to insurance companies because the truth is, this is really about who owns the data and who owns the liability. Now your name might actually be on the title of this truck, and you may have paid for it, but you don't own it. Now Ford didn't file just one patent. They filed a stack of them, all within months of each other. Are you sitting down? Get this. This Ford technology patent doesn't just watch you, this one puts you in jail. Ford filed a patent, serial number 0104469, where the system takes your biometric data, your face, your iris, and your fingerprint, and it runs it through a criminal database in real time. While you're sitting in your own truck, think about what that means. You wake up one morning, you walk out to your driveway, you climb into a vehicle with your name on the title, on property with your name on the deed. And before you go anywhere, before you've done a single thing wrong, your truck is already running your face through a law enforcement database. Ford's own patent language describes this as potentially useful for police. They wrote that. Ford wrote that into the patent application. So the question isn't whether this technology can be abused. Ford already told you who it's for. You just didn't know that you were buying a cop car. Now I'm going to walk you through a few of these patents. Lip reading, cameras inside your cab, machine learning trained on lip movement data sets. Cloud connected, your face processed somewhere you'll never see, stored as long as they want. Acoustic lip reading, if the cameras aren't enough, the system emits inaudible sound waves and reads the echoes bouncing off of your mouth. You can't see it, it's just happened. Biometrics, your face, fingerprint, iris, filed February 2024, and it was published August 2025. This one is assigned a serial number because it's real. Ad listening, this is scary. It monitors conversations between everyone in the cab. It serves targeted ads based on what you and others are talking about while you're driving. In Ford's words, maximum opportunity for ad-based monetization. No description of how that data is protected either. None. How about Ford Pro Telematics? Now this one isn't a patent. This one is actually a product page. Right now, fleet managers can pull live in-cabin video feeds of drivers on their phones. Ford markets seatbelt compliance alerts with the explicit benefit of lowering insurance costs. They said it themselves. This is the infrastructure, and once the infrastructure exists, it's going to get used and abused.
Exactly. So if that doesn't frighten you, I don't know what will. And we have a unique position here in Texas because Senator Ted Cruz chairs the committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and he chairs the committee that oversees tech and cars. For years, he's been telling us, well, let's handle this in the next reauthorization bill, which is the BUILD Act. And that's when we'll deal with it because I don't think we have the votes to do it on an up or down vote on a standalone bill. So we went up last year and this year. And now his answer to us was, there's just not the votes in the Senate to pass it, repeal of the kill switch. I'm sorry. So we need to be calling Senator Cruz's office and telling him, you're not going to get my vote ever again if you don't take care of this issue. This is the most important issue facing his committee, bar none. And yet he is not helping Texans be protected from that kind of a nanny state car from a guy who ran as a constitutional conservative. It just makes no sense. So please, right now, this is the Capitol switchboard. You can call and get his office, 202-224-3121. And he needs to whip that vote like he did for school choice and other things in Texas. The current Build Act does not have a repeal of the kill switch in it, despite us lobbying for it for 4 years straight. So this is a huge problem. I'll give you a second to take a picture. There we go. Thank you so much, y'all. All right, for those who don't know a lot about me and my husband, here, Roger, wave hi. We have 10 kids, and we homeschool them all. And we've lived in the Texas Hill Country the entire time we've been in Texas. Although we were born and raised in California, we try to kind of say that sheepishly because, you know, you can get rotten tomatoes thrown at you in Texas if you say you're from California sometimes. We saw some threats that were happening back when we lived closer to San Antonio than we do now, and I got involved. Just like Molly's saying, we see a threat and we're like, this is not good. So I'm going to start with where I started from. Then I'm going to take you down the path of where all these different things are going to dovetail together, and you're going to start to see the big picture of what's really happening to our freedom to travel. Because that's what I'm talking about today, and most people don't even think about it. We take it for granted, right? We go out of our driveways and we assume we're able to go wherever we want to go. The open road like a car commercial. Well, that's not what's happening anymore, and there are some people that are out there with an agenda, and they're trying to take our cars from us. So with that, I'm going to get started. Then, let's get to those automatic license plate reader cameras known as Flock. Flock is a brand name. It does have a more extensive database and system of AI than just the run-of-the-mill ALPRs. But what are they? They're high-speed cameras. They're usually mounted on police cars, poles, or traffic lights, and they snap pictures of your license plates. They use special software to turn those pictures into readable text, and it saves your license plate number, the exact date, time, and GPS location of your car. The ALPRs capture data on vehicles regardless of whether you're implicated in a crime. Okay? So there's no question that this is a government surveillance state that violates our Fourth Amendment rights, just like the kill switch does. Police departments are not required to get a search warrant to get access to this data. Now, flock cameras are the most invasive of all the types at this time. They use AI to capture even more detail, the make of your vehicle, the model, unique features like dents or scratches, or stickers or aftermarket parts. It can actually also keep track of the number of people in your car and where you're going. So the Flock CEO is so upset at the pushback from Americans who are upset about these cameras and all the damage that's happening to these cameras, like where people are dismantling them. Not just here, it's in Europe too. They're calling them terroristic, or now terrorists if we don't like this type of government surveillance state being unleashed on us without our consent. By the way, there are a couple of state reps here in Texas that are doing good work on this. And one of them is Representative Mitch Little. Harrison is another one. And Brian Harrison's a good name for you to remember because he's going to be at an event here in Kerrville in a couple of months. We'd love for you to come join us for it. But both of them are saying nobody gave consent to this. The legislature didn't give them consent, and the people of Texas have never given them consent. And it just straight up violates our constitutional rights. So it makes no sense that this is actually happening everywhere. AI has transformed these systems into mass surveillance tools. I think there's no question about that. It can track your vehicle movements over time, store all this detailed historical data, and the common uses include creating movement profiles without a warrant, broadly sharing data with other agencies, and generating ongoing geofence-style surveillance. And that is from a great member of Congress. His name is Keith Self. He's from the Plano, Texas area. He's doing great work up there, and he just filed a bill, yay, last week called the Privacy Act. And it is to basically put guardrails around these types of camera systems, and they have to have a warrant before they can ever access any kind of this data. And it also puts down how long they're allowed to store the data, who's allowed to get access to that data, and not allow them to monetize the data and sell stuff to you like you heard on the fourth patent. Okay, So the GOP platform, that's something that we just did a few weeks ago in late May. The Republican Party of Texas met to do their platform and their legislative priorities. And we actually got a very strong plank in the platform that now tells all these Republican lawmakers, plank number 55, we want a complete ban on these ALPR cameras. So we should clap, that's good news. It's also made the top 10 legislative priority list, which that actually gets backed officially by the party. Now usually it's just the top 8 that get officially backed by the party, but it made the top 10 and we're gonna milk it for all it's worth. It's a huge issue in Texas. I've been doing a lot of radio and TV on the Houston market especially. The New York Times just called this week and asked for an interview, and they said that Texas is now ground zero for the pushback on flock and LPR cameras, which is good. Remember the Alamo, right? We want to say, come and take it. I mean, this is the state where all of this should be happening. It needs to be banned in our next session, but I have to tell you, a new article came out just this morning that I was reading in the Daily Caller, and some of you might have seen it as well. Now Flock has Flock Alpha. This is autonomous drones that can track your vehicle from the air, where people can't damage the camera. It's thermal imaging and high-definition cameras that can read your license plate clearly from 2,000 feet away. They will not stop unless we force them to pass bills to protect us and keep this in a constitutional box. So flock cameras have been canceled in Austin, Texas. That's good news. LA and the entire state of New York. But why are they still in deep red, Kerr County and Bandera County? Why are they still here? Who's paying for it? Well, in Kerr County, we only found out about it because while our sheriff department was laying out their new body cam contract, they just mentioned in passing that, oh, and the camera company threw in the flock cameras or the ALPR cameras as part of the deal. Now, if they threw it in for free, those were his words, what do you think they're doing to pay for that camera system and all the AI it takes to drive and power that? Nothing's for free. If you're a private company, they have to make money. So they're monetizing that data. They're selling it. They're selling our driver data without our consent. And there's actually federal grants, which the Republicans haven't done anything about because I've read the BUILD Act and it's not in there. They have federal grants called Model Cities Initiative that are encouraging ALPR cameras. They're giving federal money, tax money, your tax money, to encourage all these little cities and towns to put these cameras in. That's how they're getting the money to do it. If they don't have the camera company, give it to them for free. If you want to know if you've been tracked by a flock camera, go to IhaveBeenFlocked.com and they can tell you if you have any data in that system. So again, Keith Self, awesome on this issue. That's him in that picture right there in the Texan. Said Americans have a constitutional right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. That's basically the Fourth Amendment. And our government is supposed to get a warrant before invading that privacy. My bill simply restores that protection. Get a warrant. And by the way, he's been just as strong on the kill switch, and so is Chip Roy, our congressman, and members of the Freedom Caucus in particular. Scott Perry from Pennsylvania has filed our bill twice now in 2 different sessions of Congress to repeal the kill switch. I do know that Chip, along with these other guys I'm mentioning, are trying to use a ban on the kill switch as leverage on every single bill that is currently coming before Congress. On the NDAA bill, on the FISA bill, reconciliation bills, single bill that they're contemplating. They want the SAVE Act on it, and they want the repeal of the kill switch on it. They are working night and day to try and figure out how to outmaneuver this to try and get this in there. So this is all very, very important. Now we think that the recent Supreme Court decision should be helping us on this block fight, because you might know in a related case that they are just ruling that law enforcement has to get a warrant in order to access cell phone location data, okay, through a process known as geofencing. Well, we just heard how the flock cameras use geofencing, and this air flock is going to do the same thing. They use geofencing. So the court hasn't yet ruled definitively on how they can access automatic license plate reader data, but if the current Supreme Court gets a case similar to this one, we pretty much know how they'll rule, because it was a 6-3 rule. Very strong. The court held that geofence warrants for bulk cell phone location data constitutes a Fourth Amendment search, and they're not allowed to do it. So Keith Self said that in this article. He says it builds directly on the Carpenter v. United States, which requires warrants for long-term cell site location records. So the same reasoning in our view applies to these ALPR cameras and flock. Warrantless access to bulk historical data, location data, violates the Fourth Amendment. There's no question. So this really should help us, should we get a case that can go up to the Supreme Court. You've probably also been hearing about another threat to our freedom to drive is banning gas-powered cars. If Biden were still in office, if Kamala had won, they would have already imposed it by now. It was going to be in time for 2026. They already have one going in California, and all of the East Coast states, the liberal ones anyway, are all trying to impose EV mandate only and sell no more gas-powered cars in their states. It took me 2 sessions, but we finally got one passed last session in the 89th legislative session last year. We finally passed a bill that prohibits a ban on gas-powered cars in Texas. So amen to that. We finally got some good news. Okay, remember I was saying earlier, Buttigieg, under the Biden administration and the Democrats, they think roads are racist. They actually formulated a plan in the last highway bill called Reconnecting Communities. And this is where the road diet stuff comes in. And they do it through this racial lens and DEI and all of that. And they literally want to put green spaces on top of our roadways. And that includes ripping up existing roads and putting a park on top of it. I'm not exaggerating. They actually are studying that on I-35 right now on the south side of San Antonio. Rip up your highway and stick a park on top. I don't know about you, but as a mom of 10, I'm not taking my baby in a stroller on top of a highway to go play. That's not my preferred park location. But that's what they're trying to do. It's also already happening on I-45 in Houston, so don't think it's going to be just all these other crazy liberal towns. It's also happening here in Texas. Without these things being intentionally removed by the Trump administration, we are going to continue to see this. We renamed a bunch of these leftist policies in the new BUILD Act that the Republicans have, and they took the Vision Zero name out, but they just increased the funding for it. These are Republicans that had authored the bill. They're still doing all the same stuff that the Buttigieg and the Biden bill did, and just renaming things to hide it from the public. So this is not good. How many of you have heard the term right to repair? Anyone heard right to repair? Okay, very good. A couple of you have. This is basically planned obsolescence of your vehicle parts so that you can't keep your car in working order. This is another way they're going to take your car from you. They're basically saying that either a corporation or government can stop you from using your car. Do you really own your car? Similar to the Ford video. Do we really own our cars if somebody else can control how you use your car? This is the same thing, where if they say, well, you can no longer get a replacement battery for that model and year, do you really own your car if you can't keep it in working order? So that's another thing that they're trying to do to take away our vehicles. And you're going to be forced to pay astronomical prices to manufacturers to get access to these things. So here's one example. This was in the Blaze in 2022. A family bought a used EV for their daughter, $11,000, a Ford Focus. It was a 2014. It was only an 8-year-old car at the time. They only had 60,000 miles on it. Okay, that's not much. It stopped working, took it to the dealer. They said the battery replacement cost would now be $14,000. More than the car is worth. But even worse is that we no longer support that battery anymore. And this is in 2022 for an only 8-year-old car. They're no longer supporting the battery. You can no longer drive your car. But they said, oh, but we'll offer to take it off your hands for $500. So you're out $10,500 for a car that you just purchased, a used car. So you see why this becomes very important. Well, we had several bills to do this last session. I'm very happy to report we are the first red state to pass a right to repair law. However, ours was not a very robust one when it comes to automobiles. So we still want to keep going and get a little bit further on this. We've also gone up to DC to get a right to repair law and part of the BUILD Act and get the Republicans to pass it as part of that. That is not currently in the BUILD Act, even though twice we've been up there asking them to put right to repair in there. But we have a little bit of a glimmer of hope from Trump here in a minute, and I'll show you what that's about. But basically, this helps everyday consumers that are burdened by costly auto repairs and keeps you from having these software restrictions, software locks. They did it to John Deere tractors for any of you who have farms. You know what I'm talking about. One good thing the Trump administration has done, there's two actually, but on this one, it's called the endangerment finding. It sounds like, geek out kind of policy stuff. But what it is, it's where they would not allow what they call carbon dioxide a toxin, and therefore it's an emission that can be regulated by the EPA. So then they put all of these arcane emissions controls on cars. How many of you have a truck with DEF? Okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. That is downhill of Obama passing this policy that called CO2 toxic emission. So it began during the Bush administration, but left-wing activists have started it with the Clean Air Act. But under the Obama administration, they interpreted the Clean Air Act to mean that carbon dioxide is now a pollutant that can be regulated. So that's when it all started and led to trillions of dollars in regulations on the American auto industry. Trump has now repealed the endangerment finding and is going to save you between $2,500 and $5,000 per vehicle cost to get rid of that endangerment finding. So we're very, very grateful for that. Then most recently, on June 29th, just a few weeks ago, he also did something called the Right to Fix. Right to Fix executive order. This allows you to legally mess with your emissions on the DEF and delete your truck without having to go to jail or face $89,000 in fines like happened to a Canadian truck driver. So we want a comprehensive Right to Repair Act in the Build Act, and that's what we've been working very hard on, to have it not just be emissions, but on all of our car parts. What does it all mean? Let's thread the needle. The left wants to use a mileage tax to know where you go and how many miles you've driven per month. Through the carbon emissions reporting, they're going to know how much carbon we supposedly emit. And through the kill switch or obsolescence of our car parts, they'll monitor our carbon usage and be able to keep us from driving. That's what this really means, all these policies put together. And I wanted to let you know some good news. We not only had strong freedom to travel plank in the past 2 platforms, we enhanced it even more this time around, but I want you to see what it says. The official Republican Party of Texas now says we oppose net zero, vision zero, declarations of climate emergencies, other policies that restrict, control, or prohibit driving, particularly gas-powered cars, or if they try to shrink our auto capacity, intentionally clog our vehicle lanes to force deference to pedestrian, bike, or mass transit options, and any policy that seeks to restrict Texans' freedom to travel, including a vehicle kill switch, road diets, autonomous vehicles, digital ID, mileage tax, carbon tax, emissions testing, toll billing abuses, and any unconstitutional tolls in perpetuity. So it's very long, but it's very thorough. Also, Plank 56 on toll roads, still in there, calls for abolishing all existing toll roads, prohibiting any future construction of toll roads, and to end the toll billing abuses. And yet, what did we get last session? They actually wanted to unleash more toll roads on us. So it's going to be a co-fight, as we can tell. We also had a digital ID bill that I've had to go up against at least 3 sessions, except last session it passed the House. Usually when it passes one chamber, by the next session it's going to pass both. So we have to continue to push back on digital ID. Again, this can be hacked. People can use it to steal your identity. The cost to the state would be unknowable. You know how much it's going to take in cybersecurity people to keep those IDs from being hacked or have security risks from them? I mean, right now they issue you just, a hard copy. It's probably, $1? But this would cost us enormous sums of money. Not to mention that voter ID is a huge issue. The SAVE Act, trying to pass that's been a big uphill battle. Can you imagine digital ID and how easy voter fraud would become with a digital ID? Not good. So this is our legislative agenda going into the session next year. It's the taxpayer first. That's what we like to say. We want to protect your right to drive, including your right to repair and keep you from road diets and kill switches. We want to remove the tolls off these roads that have been paid for long ago. We don't want tolls in perpetuity because those taxes are getting way too high for drivers to afford. And the toll billing reform needs to happen because you shouldn't be a criminal over an unpaid bill and have them take your car, impound it, block your vehicle registration, or actually throw you in jail. So one of the first things, how many of you were in San Antonio long enough to know if we were going to be pummeled with toll roads? Do you remember Rick Perry, our former governor, and he wanted to toll everything that moved in Texas. If it was a highway, a state highway under his jurisdiction, it was all going to be handed over. And it was going to be handed over to foreign corporations. So you can imagine how well that went over in Texas. So we started hosting meetings in just the Reagan Library, the Reagan High School Library, even though we lived up in the hill country. Had a friend that did radio and he announced it and we just started pushing back on it. But I'm going to take you fast forward to where we are since last year, because how many of you heard about the big fight between Trump and the governor of New York and Kathy Hochul over congestion toll? Do you remember hearing about that at all? See, no one knows about transportation. It's okay, I will inform you. Okay, so what happened was January of last year, and this is of course when Trump took office, so it really made it kind of dicey. She imposed a congestion tolling program, and that means now that it was going to cost $9 per car to enter Manhattan. We can imagine that how this hits, especially the working class. The stated purpose was to reduce traffic. Well, they're reducing it because they're pricing you off of your roadway. right? And it also was to use the money, they wanted to raid the money from the people that drive cars in order to pay for their ailing public transit system that needed money. So it was kind of Robin Hood on top of that. You can see all the places they wanted to come toll you, how much money it was. If you had their toll tag, it was cheaper. If not, you have to pay the higher price, which you see in the red. It was very expensive. And it was deeply unpopular. You had teachers unions and labor unions at the same time as your ordinary taxpayer that's just mad were all upset about this congestion tolling happening in New York City. They were concealing their license plates, doing the thing like they're doing with the flock cameras, except they were doing it to avoid the tolls. Because one way or another, people have to get to work, and if you can't afford it, they're going to find a way around it. Of course, all it didn't really take cars off the road. All it did was displace them onto neighborhood streets, and now you have high-speed people trying to go through a low-speed area, and it doesn't work out so well. But President Trump happens to have Trump Tower in Manhattan, and he didn't take too kindly to having his employees taxed like this, so he tried to pull the plug on the congestion pricing. He told her, we're not doing this because they have to have federal permission basically to do it. Multiple lawsuits went flying around by Democrats, by the way, suing their own Democrat governor, which I thought was interesting. And he pulls the plug, and what really put her over the edge was when he put out on Truth Social, congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York is saved. Long live the king, said King Trump. Well, of course, that just made Kathy Hochul go crazy. But at the end of the day, they can't do it unless Congress grants an exception. This is what the Department of Transportation, which is run now by Sean Duffy, was saying. But of course, she said, oh no, I'm not going to listen to that bad orange man. And I'm going to keep tolls in place anyway. So there's been this push back and forth, okay? So she's against her own party, against her own base, and her own middle class and working class voters, and imposing this because you have kind of the leftists, if you will, maybe the environmental radicalists, or whatever you want to call them, that don't want anyone in a car. So you've got this tension in her own party. You've got the taxpayers on our end just saying, no, enough is enough on the working class. And it says here, this is what they talked about. I mean, Sean Duffy, he's like, we're fighting for working class Americans and we're not going to do this. And they threatened to yank their highway funding. Well, then fast forward, the courts blocked it, which is what they continue to do with most of what Trump's trying to do. In March of this year, a federal judge basically said he lacked the authority. But I have to say, Congress is a culprit here, but they have not filed any legislation to end the congestion tolling program, even though the president's against it. And by the way, right now, there's something called the Build Act that just got filed a few months ago, and that is our highway reauthorization bill. So every so many years, Congress has to pass a highway bill. That's the name of the new one. And they didn't put a repeal of this program in that bill, which is extremely disappointing. But that temporary pilot program came in under Bush 41 back in 1991. And it was called a pilot program. And it's not unlike what Reagan said, right? There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. And that's what you see here. New York is one of the only ones that ever got the exception granted to them to actually do the congestion pricing. But they have it in Stockholm, Sweden. They have it all over Europe. They use it to force people to stay out of certain areas. They use the toll as a means of coercion. Well, we have our own version of this in Texas. State Highway 288 outside the Houston area. They had a private toll road going over there. It was sold to these private corporations. There was a portion of the contracts where the state could buy it back. And the tolls were getting so high, so fast, and the taxpayers were so upset about it that they proposed they would buy back this private toll road from the private corporation at a price tag of $1.7 billion. So you know it's bad if they're going to spend money to buy it back at that kind of price tag, right? So we had a little bit of help on that. We also had something back in the 2024 Republican Party platform that calls for abolishing all toll roads. I mean, people in Texas have had it with Rick Perry's toll program because it's so expensive. Well, what we got instead during last session, this was now 2 years ago in 2024 with the last legislative session, for those who don't know about how our process works in Texas. And we're about to head into, it was last year in 2025, we're about to head into one next year in 2027. We meet every 2 years. But even though the platform said no more toll roads, what did we get from the 89th legislature? We actually got a bill did pass the House, was going to unleash even more toll authorities all over the state, which meant more toll roads. And they also passed a bill to do that controversial private toll road on State Highway 130. Wanted to extend another 20 years when that private company has a 50-year deal. So they want to toll us for 70 years because they're going to make so much money off of it. Thankfully, we killed them both in the Senate. But you can see that we have an uphill battle, even in Texas. When government gets a hold of a revenue stream, they don't ever want it to go away. So this is really an unsustainable tax on driving. And I actually worked with this reporter at the Dallas Morning News, oddly enough, because a lot of times we don't work well with the press. But I did on this one. And we even had this Democrat here from Fort Worth saying he felt like they were sold a bill of goods from all of these toll contracts they were doing. Costs can now exceed $48 a day to go from Fort Worth to Dallas on those private toll roads in peak hours. So we're talking about scads of money. So they can charge you in excess of $4 to $5 a mile in Dallas-Fort Worth area during peak hours. So again, this is going to price people off of our roadway one way or another, and it's happening. We have congestion pricing like that on the Katy toll lanes outside Houston. We have them on Mopac in Austin, on 635, 820, I-35, all through the DFW area. So it is quite expensive. For those who don't know, Texas is the nation's toll road capital. Yes, even more than Orlando, Florida. In the last 20 years, we have built more toll roads than all the other states combined. Okay, that's not really a record we like to brag about in Texas, and they aggressively penalize drivers for this. So we have 128 toll facilities altogether, and more than any other region of the state is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. 1/3 of all their major thoroughfares or highways are tolled up there. 1.4 million people live in that area, and their free road options are either congested or non-existent. The tickets for these now exceed all other legal cases heard by the Justice of the Peace courts up there. So this is a huge problem, and they're inflexible with drivers. It can actually keep you from driving in Texas. It's a criminal penalty for failure to pay a toll bill in Texas. They can literally take you off to jail if you fail to pay. They can also block your vehicle registration and impound your car. Now, if you can't get to work to pay your toll bill, it's kind of counterproductive to impound your car, right? But yet that's what they're doing. We had some bills to take care of this. One that just took away the criminal penalty, which we think absolutely needs to happen, but our more comprehensive bill never even got a hearing in either committee in this House or the Senate, despite the Dallas Morning News having a 6-part series exposing all of it. And this is what the state rep who chairs the House Transportation Subcommittee on Funding has to say, that we can't have a future in Texas without more toll roads. So this is what our lawmakers want. Freedom to travel in general is under assault. Tolls are just one way that they do it. There's something called a road diet. Well, that's what they want to do with our road system. They want to shrink our existing available capacity available to our cars. And generally they give it to bikes and bus lanes. Okay, that's what you see. You see the transit-only lanes, you see the bike, pedestrian, all of that, starting to take the real estate that we've had for our vehicles. They actually, as part of a radical environmental agenda and anti-car policies, actually tries to apply diversity, equity, and inclusion policies into transportation decision-making. And we saw that when Pete Buttigieg said roads are racist. This is a systemic effort to shrink our auto capacity and make you miserable enough to get out of your car and either walk or bike everywhere you have to go or get on a bus. We actually had some bills to do that. It got heard in the House, but it did not get out of committee fast enough to get to the floor to actually make it through the process last session. And that was with it being a legislative priority voted on by the Republican Party of Texas delegates at their state convention. But we did kill a lot of other bills that tried to either slow you down or shrink your road capacity. So that was good, but we always have to fight. I mean, I'm spending almost all my time fighting literally dozens of bad bills rather than getting my good bills across the finish line. That's usually what ends up happening. It's all based on something called net zero and vision zero. Have either any of you heard of those terms before? Net zero? Okay, we'll talk about that in just a minute, but I thought that this is very true from Tom DeWeese, another friend of mine with American Policy Center, saying it's getting crazy out there. More and more of the policy proposals put out by green activists reveal their movement is not really about forcing radical, it is more about forcing radical changes to our lifestyles and not about climate science or actually protecting the environment. It's like a religion where infidels who must conform to their rites and rituals and heretics have to be silenced. And we see that very much so in the legislature. They will literally bus in Vision Zero people to every one of these committee hearings, trying to defeat my bills and try to pass theirs. And Vision Zero means zero traffic fatalities. You're not going to in a fallen world, right? I mean, there's always gonna be some mistake or someone doesn't see something or whatever's gonna happen, but that's their vision. But if you go to their website, they don't make it a secret about what their real agenda is. They don't want you to have a car. That's what their real agenda is. Net zero is zero emissions. Now, how many of you in here, show of hands, think that electric vehicles do not have any emissions? Okay, good, so you don't buy it. They do, because they use an enormous amount of electricity to charge their battery for the ride that they take, and there's also a huge amount of problems with cobalt and the lithium out of the ground and all of child labor in Africa. Then you've also got, what are we doing with the spent batteries, which is a huge toxic mess in and of itself. So I don't believe the zero emissions is attainable either. But it's really designed to force us out of our cars. That's really what this is all about. And it's about nanny state government, big government. And it's really starting in California and New York, but it's making its way into Texas through our big city mayors. It was created by Swedish activists, for the most part, and they're trying to put a socio-political ethic into transportation and all of our decision-making. How many of you have heard of the UN's Sustainable Development? I know at least one of you have, because you looked up Agenda 21 before, but that's what this is all about. It's part of Agenda 21. But they want to push it into every U.S. city, and Texas is no exception, tied to social justice and public health in order to further regulate our ability to drive our cars. And really, they want to take away all of our road taxes and give it to climate issues and or bikes, buses, and pedestrians. Well, here's what Vision Zero, they literally call it the Vision Zero plan in Houston, but every one of our major cities has one. In San Antonio, they call it the Climate Adaptation Plan. They have them all over. But they want to widen your sidewalks by 50 miles a year, not your highways. They want to increase bike lanes by 25 miles a year. They want to slow down your speed limits. In fact, I have to deal with this bill every single session for the last at least probably 12 to 15 years. Every single legislative session, there is a bill to slow down speed limits to 20 miles per hour. Okay, that's less than a school zone. Okay, school zones are 25. They want to bring it down to 20 miles per hour in anything they call an urban district. An urban district is not defined in statute, so they can make it anywhere. And they don't have to do an engineering study or any evidence whatsoever that shows it needs to be that slow. So we know what this is really about. It's about slowing you down to make you miserable enough to basically catch up with if you had to walk somewhere. So they also want to narrow streets. They want to make fewer lanes available to cars, and they actually have active road drives happening in San Antonio right now on Broadway. They had to do it on 11th Street in Houston. I help groups all over the state about trying to get the boot off their neck when it comes to taking away their road space. And these are Democrat groups I'm working with, by the way, against their own Democrat city councils and or county commissioners' courts. And then Austin's climate plan literally says at the very beginning, we created this whole thing through the lens of racial equity. So they're trying to bring race into road decision making. It literally says we want to have locally initiated community programs that are car-free, and the slow street program, the speed limit stuff. Traffic calming is slower cars. Even the Federal Highway Administration defines it for us that it's reducing vehicle speeds. This is their plan. It's in their plan. And once a city adopts the plan, every other decision that they make has to conform with that plan. So these plans become like an administrative law that we all have to abide by when no legislator votes on it, none of us vote on it. It's just being imposed based on them adopting this in these plans. So we're getting trapped by it all. Speaking of trapped, anyone ever heard of 15-minute cities? This is what they want. It was modeled after Paris. Because, we want to be Europe for some reason. They want everything you need within 15 minutes of your house. And they use these climate plans and imposes a radical anti-car ideology on all of us. And they use this mileage or congestion tax to keep you in something called, this is what they call it in Europe, sustainable travel zone. That's really what the 15-minute cities are about. But here's what they did in Cambridge, England. It was 5 pounds for cars, 20 pounds for a van, 50 for trucks between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Well, and they said it was to build a more efficient bus service. Do you see where this is going? They keep shrinking your road capacity to make all the other modes of transportation better while making yours worse, okay? And they said the purpose was to get you to switch from your car to more frequent and reliable public transportation. So really, our view is anything that's anti-car, really it comes down to becoming anti-human. It's certainly anti-family. But notice this 15-minute city slide. Okay, all of those little spokes is a 5-minute walk, 15-minute walk, 5-minute bike ride, or 15-minute bike ride. Do you see a car in there anywhere? They literally want your world to be so small that you have to walk or bike everywhere. This is a good time to talk about it, not in the winter when it's nice and cool. It really is about complete control, and they can actually impose it through these climate lockdowns. They can call almost anything a climate emergency. Oh, too much smog today in San Antonio. We're going to lock it down. Nobody can come into the downtown area. And they'll do it by the congestion pricing. That's how they'll keep you out. The World Economic Forum and the United Nations 2030 all talk about this 15-minute city concept. They want to restrict, coerce, fine, punish, surveil, and limit our fundamental freedom of movement. You can go look it up yourself and see and verify everything I'm telling you. Now, do you remember when the World Economic Forum a number of years ago now said that they want you to own nothing and eat bugs and be happy? They literally said in here that they want a world of autonomous vehicles where we all have to do ride share. You hail a ride to get anywhere if you go anywhere, if you're allowed out of your sustainable travel zone, with the government's permission, of course. You'd have to do it in an autonomous vehicle. So they're even throwing the Uber and Lyft drivers under the bus here. They want it to be completely robot-driven vehicles. Okay, now we actually have them. If you've been to any of the downtown areas in our city or our state, you see the Waymos and you see Elon's robo-taxis. They want everybody to make way for pedestrians and bicycles. They want you out of your car. Now, there was a bill last session to do autonomous vehicles, particularly trucks. They wanted to do something called level 4 and level 5 AV trucks. So if you think it's dangerous to have a robo-taxi or a Waymo, that I actually have a video on my website where they get stuck on the light rail tracks, and the people bailed from the car in time because a light rail car came and crushed the Waymo vehicle because it couldn't tell the difference between light rail tracks and the regular auto lanes. You think that's not dangerous enough for you? Imagine an 18-wheeler, which in Texas we allow up to 85,000-pound loads. Imagine that truck in the hands of just software, a robot. Okay, and it runs into stop traffic and somehow doesn't see that it's stop traffic because maybe there's a glare or there's mud on the sensor, who knows what the reason would be, and how that can easily turn into a weapon of mass destruction. Not to mention the national security threat of foreign actor or just hackers hack into that onboard system and use those trucks to put them into a federal building, run them right into a military base, put them into a school. I mean, we could have mass casualty events just like that with the next sophisticated hacker by allowing these on the road. And when I sat in the committee, both Senate and the House, and said that to them, I said, what's your answer to the national security threat? What is your security that you're going to give us any kind of reasoning of why this would be safe enough to be on our roadway? And they just kind of give you this stare. But it didn't matter. They were going to pass it anyway because those trucking companies, there's 5 of them, that lobbied the snot out of our legislature. And what happened was I killed them in committee, but they turned it into an amendment, put it on an unrelated bill in the dark of night, a few minutes before the midnight deadline in the House, and passed the bill. That's how they do it. They can't do it through the front door, so they'll find a way to go through the back door to do it past us. I didn't even know it had passed until this KUT reporter called me up and said, hey, I saw you were against this. What do you think about this AD bill that passed? And I'm like, what? It passed? And I was in shock. And she even said herself, it's like they're building the plane while it's in the air. Because there's literally no guardrails. They just unleashed them on our roadway with no safeguards for the traveling public. So it's not a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when these trucks go out of control and, kill who knows how many people, that we're going to finally see some guardrails put up on these. But we were not for this, and it is a serious national security threat. And we've been up to D.C. twice asking Congress to take action to keep these off the road. And notice, if any of you listen to that Buck and Clay show, which I don't a lot, but my daughter happened to tune in this week, they were pushing AV trucks like no tomorrow on their show. These people are getting lobbied to death by these companies and paid a lot of money in advertising dollars, I would guess, to promote this kind of policy. It is not safe for us. And so we're very, very concerned about this brave new world with the AVs. There's no human driver in them. Obviously, it's a national security threat. The consequences can be catastrophic when you're talking about 85,000-pound trucks. And there's a lot of dangerous loopholes. And remember, there's been the whole fight, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but there's been that whole fight about the commercial driver's licenses being issued to foreign drivers, right? And how dangerous that has been, where people who can't speak or read English, who are on our roads, who don't know our laws, and can't follow the laws, are doing things that are hurting Americans or killing people. So we think that even more dangerous is a car with no driver. So there's been some other headlines, this was all during the Biden years now, where they wanted to track our carbon usage. Basically, Biden was doing a backdoor carbon tax. He found a way to do it. There were two rules that passed during his administration that were extremely concerning that Trump was overturned, but we know what's going to happen when the pendulum swings the other direction. Okay, so here's what they wanted to do. They wanted all consumer products to have a carbon rating on them and to know how much carbon was used or output from that product. And why do you think that would be? Why would the government want to know the carbon rating and have a carbon rating system on every product you use? Well, we would guess it's because they want to regulate it and regulate your use of it and eventually ration your use of it, right? So they had you estimate carbon output. Anything with an on-off switch or a plug, they were going to say this is how much carbon this thing uses, okay? And it's the groundwork for scoring people's individual activities. And if your score gets too high, guess what? They'll shut you down. So we see this in China, everywhere else, particularly France and Spain, where they have this score that's going to be basically like this, a comprehensive government surveillance system. And based on how cooperative you are with the government is how much freedom you're allowed to have in the public square. So this is what they can do. They'll have a rating for you with your onboard systems on your car that says, oh, we have distraction, we have anger, the mouth is open, this is a problem. Well then, with this tracking your carbon usage, this was an article from the Heartland Institute, if you've never heard of them, they're like a heritage foundation, a national think tank, where they talked to a FICO analyst who said and predicted that there will be an increased focus on developing this type of social scoring system or a carbon profile. It's going to become part of your credit profile. And whether or not you're getting access to insurance or loans or who knows what, it's going to be your financial profile. Over the long term, they expect that this ESG, which is environment, social governance, and climate risk evaluations are going to become an integral part of your credit risk. And eventually you're going to have a personalized social credit score, and your access to loans, your interest rate, everything is going to be determined on. You are going to pay more for everything that you do in society, and whether or not you're even eligible for insurance coverage. Okay, so we just got notice of this. A new report came out literally just this week. American Energy Works, it's also a think tank. But Jason Isaac started it. He's a former state rep here in Texas. He also used to work for the Texas Public Policy Foundation under their, what they call Life Powered, which is kind of their energy wing of their think tank. And he's now got his own group called American Energy Works. And they, along with certain realtors that have experienced this already, have asked Congress to investigate because they're now finding, they just issued this report this week, major real estate platforms, including Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, all of those that you've all heard of, are now assessing a climate risk score to your property when you put it up for sale. Okay, this is already happening. That social score that was just sort of predicted just in 2022, here we are 4 years later in 2026, and it's happening already. So what they do is they, unlike a FEMA flood determination, they're trying to basically say that certain homes are in a flood risk. They're basically calling everything a floodplain, even when it doesn't match the FEMA map. There's no meaningful dispute process. If the homeowner disagrees or says, hey, I'm not even in a FEMA floodplain, why are you putting this flood score or high risk of climate catastrophe on my house? Well, of course that's going to affect your property value, how many days it's on the market, whether or not you can even sell at the end of the day. And all of this is happening right now. These same firms actively promote net zero. Okay, so this is all radical environmentalism now being applied to your ability to sell your home or potentially buy a home. And that's happening right now. Then the second rule that passed under the Biden administration that has thankfully been walked back a bit by Trump, thankfully, is the Department of Transportation was also asking states to report our carbon emissions from our vehicles. But somehow the states were going to have to waste their time figuring out how do we know carbon from various things and report that to the Department of Transportation or the Federal Highway Administration. They were going to be required to establish emissions targets as part of a national policy. Now, why do you think they want to do that? If you look at the bottom, that's why. First, it starts with mandatory reporting. Then they regulate it so they can eventually ration your use of something. And that's what these rules were all meant to do. Thankfully, Trump rescinded that greenhouse gas rule on January 29th of this year. So that's good news. Then there's the mileage tax. It was put into the Biden infrastructure bill passed in 2021. It was a pilot program, but we know how long those last, right? And this was to gain acceptance on a per mile user fee. Well, that's a fancy way of saying a toll for every mile you drive. Okay, so now even if you don't live in the urban areas where they're tolling you to death and paying all that extra money out of your pocket to get everywhere, they're going to get you one way or another, including in rural Texas, where we actually have to drive more miles to get where we need to go because we're in rural areas. And they're going to do it by imposing a mileage tax, okay? They want it in every state in America. Well, here's what the GAO, which is the Government Accountability Office, this is their vision of ways they could collect it. They can do it through the mail, using GPS to track your car. Doesn't that sound fun? The government tracking every mile you drive. Then you have the pay at the pump system, where you could try that. And then another one that does it through this toll tag system, similar to the toll roads do, which of course, none of us like that either. But your privacy is completely gone. I mean, if the government does this to us, your privacy will be gone. This is highly sensitive personal data. Think about it. If they can know what doctor's offices you're going to, what houses you're going to, what businesses you patronize, maybe they know, oh, you must be a 2A person because you go to that gun shop an awful lot. And eventually, with your social score, they're not going to like that too much, so they're going to start imposing things on you because they don't like it. They might even do it if you're a conservative versus a liberal. It can be on anything. Your destinations can also be tracked along with your mileage. And we know that it's going to be weaponized against us. This is not a big leap after what we all lived through with COVID. So this is something that Theodore Claypool said with the Hey Data Data blog, and we have a fellow blogger in here. Every day we are stalked by the billion-byte beast, and yet we remain relatively blasé about it. At least our kids are, right? They don't seem to care about all this electronic frontier. But gathering information on driving for tax purposes is a whole different story. And I think that we can all see that there's a big distinction there. Well, the mileage tax isn't a tax for every mile you drive, but something you may not realize is that this is also happening in Texas. We managed to stop it in 2023 in the 88th legislature, but here's what the actually filed bill sought to do in Texas. Okay, let's bring it down. They wanted to vary the pricing based on time of day. So if you're a poor working stiff that has to be at work between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., you're going to be paying peak hour pricing to take the roadway under this scenario. Even the type of public highway you're on, the proximity of where you live to transit, and how dare you not get on a bus instead, you're going to pay more for not taking transit than those who live further from transit. It also was going to base your toll on vehicle fuel efficiency, so we're out because we have to drive a 12-passenger van, and whether or not you're participating in car sharing or carpooling. And here's the real kicker, so straight up socialist, the income of the driver. So if you can pay more, they will get you for more money. Okay, so that's what they want for us, folks. Thankfully, I stopped it, but they're going to come for us again. You watch. So they can track and penalize drivers if you drive too much, the wrong time of day, choosing to drive when you live close to transit. And Texas should follow Arizona's model. They actually passed a constitutional amendment to protect us from future efforts to impose a mileage tax. So they're protected, but we're not. And meanwhile, a Republican-written new highway bill that I mentioned at Congress, now this is our federal Congress, they have to pass a highway reauthorization bill by September 1. Okay, we're running out of time here. The BUILD Act is out now. You can read it for yourself. Does not, it actually includes in it a Biden-era mileage tax is continued. The pilot program is continued in a Republican-written highway bill. So when you hear the term uniparty, I think that's what people mean when they talk about that. Now, how many of you have heard of this very controversial and scary concept of a kill switch going into our cars, okay? So this has been my baby for the last 5 years. You would be amazed to know that in 2022 and 2023, when we were up in Washington, D.C., talking to members of the House and Senate Transportation Committees. And these are the people who wrote the bill and or voted for the bill, and they're responsible for vetting all this information. We were informing them of Section 24220 in the Biden infrastructure bill, and that it actually has the ability for the government to passively monitor our driving, and if they don't like how you're driving, it cuts power to your car. They didn't know. These are the people that passed the bill and didn't know what was in it. This would surveil Americans and track us without a warrant. And obviously it poses a grave threat, not only to our freedom to travel, but cutting power to your car while you're in the middle of driving is never a good idea. It is extremely unsafe and very scary. But here's what it actually says. It says, the technology is a system that can passively monitor the performance of a motor vehicle and accurately identify whether the driver may be impaired. Impaired is not defined. It does not mean drunk driving. If it thinks you're impaired at all. So maybe your eyes are off the road or you're talking to your kids in the back seat for a minute. Okay? And prevent or limit motor vehicle operation if impairment is detected. So straight up, there is a kill switch. It says to passively and accurately detect whether the blood alcohol concentration of a driver of a motor vehicle is equal to or greater than. And then it says prevent and limit motor vehicle operation or a combination of those systems. So what we said earlier is if you're impaired or if you're drunk. Either way, they're going to cut power to your car. Well, what can the kill switch actually do? Well, after Congress passes something, the department that's in charge of implementing the new law, which in this case is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration under the Department of Transportation, so we call that entity NHTSA. So NHTSA put forward their draft rule shortly after we were in DC trying to repeal this. And this is what's going to monitor. This is going to do lane monitoring. So if you're swerving too much in a lane. It's going to be eye monitoring. So it's going to have onboard cameras facing the driver and people in your vehicle at all times to monitoring your lane. It's going to monitor the air inside your car, the breath. The government is going to monitor your breathing inside the car. And we also just found out in this year's report to Congress on the kill switch from NHTSA, it will include touch sensors. They are now being asked to develop how to accurately detect blood alcohol levels by your touch start system in your vehicle and or your steering wheel. So it will have touch sensors to detect your alcohol level and or your stress level. And if you're deemed unfit to drive, either your car won't start or it's going to cease operation of the vehicle. Now there's no due process in any of this. How do you get out from under a false flag kill switch event? Maybe you were swerving because there was a deer, or there was trash in the road, or in the case of a flood, debris in the road, okay? What do? How do you get out of it? The technology, the AI, becomes your judge, jury, and executioner. Well, we went up in 2023 and 2025 to DC to try and get some help and get Congress to repeal it, because technically they opened the door to this mess. They're the ones that have to repeal it, even though we tried to get a couple of state bills passed to protect us from the kill switch, at least in Texas. So we asked Congressman Thomas Massey. Well, we wanted to defund the kill switch back in September 23. We had support and a letter from over 200 grassroots groups all across the state of Texas. We went again in June of 25 to get Congress to act. And then Massey brought it again this January in 2026, and it failed by 57 votes. And you're going to see, 2023, it failed by 28 votes. And 19 Republicans voted with the Democrats to keep the kill switch in your car, folks. The only Texan that diverted from us, all the rest voted with us, at least the Republicans did, was Michael McCall. Then, this year, it was even more, by 57 votes. And these are the Republicans that voted with the Democrats to keep the kill switch technology in our cars. You might be asking, what can I do, right? Well, we would love it if you'd sign up on our email list that's going around. I don't share it with anybody. I'm not going to market to you like these car companies will. No ads, I promise. Educate the people around you. We need to be you talking about these issues with everyone you know, particularly voters. We all want to hold them accountable. I'd actually produce a report card after every session of the legislature so you know how they did on these issues. Get a grade, and it's on my website. I have a whole history of it for every 20 years I've been doing this. So with that, I'm up there 2 days a week, all during the session, usually for the House and the Senate Transportation Committee hearings, and sometimes in between if needed. It's going to take citizens pushing back, because government isn't going to fix it for us. The Republicans aren't going to fix it for us. The Democrats aren't going to fix it for us. and Trump's ability has been very hampered by the courts. So it's going to be us. We have to be vigilant, and freedom is only one generation away. So we have to instill it in the DNA of our kids and defend it ourselves and make sure we pass on a better America to our kids than we have right now. So thank you for having me.